Have you ever wondered what a single day felt like for an ordinary person as the mighty Roman Empire crumbled? Imagine the contrast between bustling streets filled with merchants, children, and laborers, and the quiet, uncertain life that followed when Rome's power faded. In this story, we will follow a simple villager's daily life, first under the security and rhythm of the empire, then in the uneasy aftermath of its fall. Each moment will unfold slowly, letting you drift into the world of long-ago everyday life, where survival, work, and quiet joys shaped every breath. The sun rose gently over the horizon, spilling golden light across the terracotta rooftops of a small Roman village. Smoke curled lazily from the clay chimneys of modest homes, marking the beginning of another day. Outside, the streets were lined with simple wooden carts, some carrying firewood, others laden with baskets of freshly harvested grains. A gentle hum of activity filled the air, chickens clucked in courtyards, children's bare feet scuffed against cobblestones, and the occasional neigh of a tethered donkey echoed between houses. Life in the village moved with a quiet rhythm, dictated by the rising sun and the work it demanded. In one such home, the small family of a laborer awoke to the familiar sounds of morning. The father, a sturdy man with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands, began his day by fetching water from the nearby well. He lifted the wooden bucket carefully, feeling the cool weight of liquid that would nourish both the family and their small garden. The mother, still brushing the sleep from her eyes, set about preparing a simple breakfast, flatbread baked the night before and a bowl of thin porridge. The children, yawning and stretching, moved slowly but eagerly, for after breakfast awaited the fields and the streets where work was already calling. The village itself was a mixture of earthy simplicity and practical structure. Homes were close together, sharing walls that had been patched and reinforced many times over the years. The streets were uneven, dotted with stones that had been worn smooth by countless footsteps over generations. Beyond the homes lay small plots of cultivated land, each fenced with rough-hewn timber. Here, families grew vegetables and kept a few animals, chickens for eggs, goats for milk, and occasionally a pig to fatten over the months. The laborer walked along these paths, inspecting the crops and tending to the animals, ensuring nothing had been lost to the night's quiet threats, stray dogs, wandering livestock, or even the occasional thief. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, casting brighter light across the village. Merchants began their rounds, pushing small carts with fruits, herbs, and clay pots. The air carried a mixture of scents, earthy soil, baked bread, and the sharp tang of fresh vegetables. Some villagers traded their goods, exchanging eggs for flour or barley for a few coins. Others, unable to travel far, relied on neighbors to bring them what they needed. There was no rush, but a constant, steady flow of movement, every person aware of their tasks and the silent expectation that life must continue, day after day. In the fields beyond the village, laborers bent over rows of wheat, their hands moving in careful rhythm. The sound of scythes slicing through stalks created a soft, swishing melody that merged with the distant bleating of goats and the lowing of cattle. Dust rose in thin clouds under the steady pace of work, glinting like tiny golden particles in the morning sun. The rhythm of life was anchored in labor, the planting, tending, and harvesting of crops, the care of animals, and the repair of homes and tools. There was an unspoken satisfaction in this routine, a sense of purpose grounded in the tangible results of each day's effort. Even as the Roman Empire maintained its vast authority, life in the village was largely independent of the grand politics and distant battles. Soldiers and officials rarely passed through, and when they did, their presence was brief, a messenger bearing an edict or a tax collector walking with a careful eye over the modest earnings of villagers. Most days were untouched by the empire's distant might, focused instead on the immediate concerns of sustenance, shelter, and small joys, the laughter of children playing in the dirt, the slow warmth of the sun on a tired worker's back, the quiet companionship of family gathered at a midday meal. By late morning, the laborer returned to his home briefly, wiping sweat from his brow. The family shared a simple meal, the mother handing bread to each child while the father ensured the younger goats had been fed. Outside, the village continued its soft symphony of work, women fetching water, men repairing fences, children chasing each other around the garden plots. Even in the simplicity of these tasks, there was a sense of connection, each action weaving the small community closer together. The day pressed onward, carrying the villagers through tasks both ordinary and essential. There was a quiet pride in the care taken to maintain their homes, to cultivate the earth, and to nurture the animals that sustained them. Life moved in steady cycles, guided by the sun and the seasons, and the villagers, though modest in means, found comfort in the predictable rhythm of their days. Even under the empire, the villagers' lives were marked by small independence. Their existence, though modest, was sustained by labor, shared responsibility, and the close bonds of community. The same sun rose over the village, though its light now fell on a quieter, rougher landscape. Where once Roman authority had ensured roads were maintained and merchants moved freely, now dust drifted over uneven paths, and some houses showed the scars of neglect. The distant hum of organized activity had faded, fewer traders passed through, and those who came carried simpler goods, often bartered rather than sold for coins. The village had grown more isolated, yet life continued, stubbornly persistent, shaped by necessity and the rhythm of the natural world rather than the decrees of emperors. The laborer awoke to the morning as before, but the tasks felt heavier now. The well, once carefully maintained by communal effort, required more work to keep water flowing. Its wooden bucket was rough, and the rope frayed from years of use. Carrying water back to the house, he noticed the cracks in the walls that had grown larger during the cold, harsh winters. The family's breakfast remained modest, a thin porridge and a few small loaves of bread. There were no traders with exotic spices or fresh fruits today, the remnants of Rome's prosperity had faded, leaving only what the land itself could provide. Outside, the fields stretched in irregular patches, some overgrown with weeds where labor had lagged or seeds had failed to sprout. The laborer moved carefully, tending what he could salvage. Goats and chickens wandered freely, sometimes escaping enclosures that had decayed with time. Every action required more effort than before, the comfort of infrastructure and distant authority had vanished, replaced by a raw reliance on skill, patience, and vigilance. The children helped where they could, carrying small bundles of kindling or fetching water, learning early that survival now depended on constant work. The village itself had changed. Roof tiles had slipped, and fences leaned unevenly. The streets, once maintained with a semblance of order, were rough and dusty, often muddied by rain with no organized drainage to clear it. Small signs of decline were everywhere, yet there remained a stubborn pulse of life. People moved about with caution, aware that the absence of imperial protection meant vigilance was as necessary as work. Stray animals, and sometimes wandering groups of desperate travelers, reminded the villagers of the wider world's instability. Yet they endured, finding ways to adapt to the harsher, quieter life that had replaced the once bustling, secure days under Rome. By mid-morning, the laborer inspected the fields more thoroughly. Where Roman roads had allowed for easy transport of grain and trade, now he relied on local routes to bring in what was needed, carrying baskets and sacks across uneven terrain. The sun burned brighter in the cloudless sky, reflecting off the rough earth and the faded clay rooftops. Work required ingenuity, broken tools were repaired with whatever scraps were available, fences reinforced with branches and stones, and water conserved more carefully than ever before. The family worked together closely, sharing the burdens that had grown heavier without the distant support of the empire. Even as the day wore on, the village retained its subtle beauty. Wildflowers bloomed in patches between cracked stones, and birds sang from the tops of leaning fences. The laborer paused for a moment, watching the children chase each other across the dusty paths, their laughter a fragile echo of simpler times. The small joys persisted, even as the framework of Roman order had crumbled. Every loaf of bread baked successfully, every patch of wheat harvested, was a quiet triumph. Life had become more solitary, more measured, but the villagers carried forward with a quiet resilience that had been tested by circumstance yet remained unbroken. By noon, the sun hung high, casting shadows across the village. The laborer rested briefly, leaning on a worn wooden fence, his back sore but steady. The midday meal was frugal, shared in the shade of a leaning wall, flatbread, some porridge, a few vegetables from the patchwork garden. Conversation was sparse, words were unnecessary when each action was a statement of endurance, a signal of the family's ability to adapt and survive. Outside, the village continued to pulse quietly with life, women collected herbs and firewood, children played under watchful eyes, and the livestock moved freely in the uncultivated edges of the fields. The absence of empire had brought unpredictability. Storms could wash away crops, stray wolves or thieves could threaten livestock, and illness spread more easily without distant medical knowledge or supply. Yet the laborer and his family had adapted. Their lives had become a mixture of careful planning, relentless effort, and small moments of celebration, a goat that gave more milk than expected, a child's laughter, or a warm sun casting light on a home that, though worn, still sheltered them. As the afternoon waned, the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the uneven streets and fields. The village, though quieter than in the days of Rome's authority, carried a subtle rhythm of preparation for the coming evening. The laborer paused in his work, stretching his tired limbs, and looked over the small plots of land, the patchwork of gardens and cultivated fields bathed in a warm amber glow. The air was thick with the scent of sun-baked earth, herbs, and the faint aroma of cooking fires from the homes nearby. Life, though harder now, still moved with purpose. The animals began to gather near the small enclosures, instinctively sensing the close of day. Chickens clucked and pecked at scattered grains, goats nibbled at remaining grass, and a solitary pig wallowed lazily in the soft mud of its pen. The laborer guided them carefully, ensuring that no strays wandered too far, knowing that in this quieter, less protected world, a lost animal could be a serious loss. The children ran alongside him, carrying small baskets, their movements lighter now as play mixed with chores. The simplicity of these tasks offered a rhythm that helped ease the weariness of the day. Inside the modest home, the mother worked quietly by the fire, tending a small pot of thin stew made from vegetables and grains. The aroma spread through the house, signaling the approaching evening meal. The laborer returned, wiping sweat from his brow, his hands rough and calloused from hours of tending the fields and animals. Together, the family arranged their meager meal, sharing small portions in silence. Words were few, the day had been long, and in this time, action spoke louder than conversation. Each bite carried the weight of survival, a quiet reminder of their endurance in a world without the order and protection once provided by Rome. Outside, the village settled into a slower pace. Dust from the day's labor settled in the corners of streets and between stones. The wind carried whispers of the surrounding forests, where wild animals roamed freely, and the occasional distant howl reminded the villagers of the ever-present fragility of their existence. The laborer paused at the door, gazing at the landscape beyond the village, the rolling hills and untamed fields, now more their companions than distant lands ruled by an emperor. The absence of distant authority had made the world both freer and harsher, each day a negotiation between the demands of survival and the comforts that persisted despite hardship. As twilight deepened, the sky shifted from gold to deep blue, and stars began to twinkle faintly over the village rooftops. Lanterns and small fires flickered in homes, casting shadows that danced across walls and fences. The family completed the evening chores, collecting firewood, securing doors, and ensuring that animals were safely enclosed. Each task was deliberate, performed with care and attention, for in this new world, small mistakes could carry significant consequences. The laborer moved with a calm patience, knowing that the safety of his family rested on these simple, necessary routines. The children, their energy slowly waning, sat near the hearth as the mother cleaned up from the meal. The laborer joined them, his hands still rough but steady, reflecting a day's work completed under the weight of new responsibilities. Though the empire had fallen, the basic rhythms of life, work, family, and care for one's home, remained, offering a steady pulse amid uncertainty. The evening carried a quiet beauty, with the soft sounds of animals settling, the distant rustle of leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl signaling the deepening night. By nightfall, the village had grown still. Windows glowed softly with candlelight, fires crackled gently in hearths, and the air cooled, carrying the scent of earth and smoke. The laborer and his family gathered close, the day's fatigue evident but softened by the quiet comfort of shelter and routine. The absence of imperial order had not erased the structure of daily life entirely, rather, it had shifted, placing responsibility squarely on those who remained. Each day now demanded care, patience, and resilience, yet also offered a closer connection to the land, the seasons, and one another. In the calm of night, the laborer reflected briefly on the day, how the fields had been tended, the animals cared for, the home maintained. Each small achievement was a triumph in a world reshaped by history's sweep. Beyond the village, shadows stretched into the forested hills and valleys, the unknown pressing gently against the familiarity of home. Yet within the small walls of their dwelling, the family found warmth, safety, and the quiet assurance that tomorrow would come, and with it, the continuation of life, ordinary, simple, and resilient. As sleep approached, the laborer lay on his mat, listening to the soft breathing of his children and the distant hum of the night. The night deepened, and the village lay in quiet shadow. The soft glow of lanterns flickered behind wooden shutters, and the occasional hoot of an owl punctuated the stillness. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the scent of earth, smoke, and distant forests. The laborer's home was a small haven within this darkened landscape, each wall and beam a testament to care and perseverance. The family slept in staggered quiet, children nestled close to their mother, while he remained awake for a few moments longer, listening to the subtle rhythm of the night, the rustle of leaves, the shifting of animals, the gentle creak of doors and fences settling. The absence of empire's authority had left the village exposed to the wider uncertainties of the world, yet this night, like every night, life continued within the walls that the villagers had built and maintained themselves. The laborer considered the challenges that tomorrow would bring, tending the fields, mending fences, preparing for potential storms, and protecting the animals from wandering threats. But these thoughts, heavy as they might seem, were tempered by the quiet knowledge that he, his family, and his neighbors were capable, resilient, and intimately connected to the land that sustained them. Each day had strengthened skills, patience, and awareness in ways that the ordered empire had never demanded. Outside, the animals slept, huddled in pens or in the soft grass of their small enclosures. The chickens nestled together, goats lay with heads tucked against one another, and the pig lay still in its muddy corner, all trusting the laborer's care. Even in the silence, there was motion, leaves stirred by the night wind, and the distant hills whispered the quiet sound of the untamed wilderness that stretched beyond the village boundaries. Life had become an attentive observation of small details, the direction of the wind, the signs of changing weather, the subtle behavior of animals that could foretell the coming day. The laborer finally lay down, exhausted yet satisfied with the day's efforts. The mattress of straw beneath him was simple but sufficient, and he listened to the gentle breathing of his children and wife, each sound a reminder of continuity and survival. Sleep came slowly at first, the mind wandering over the day's labors, the changing village, and the distant memories of a world that had been structured by the might of Rome. In the quiet darkness, the impermanence of human constructs was clear, yet the enduring persistence of daily life, of care, and of family shone brighter than any distant empire. Hours passed, and the night deepened further. The coolness of pre-dawn settled over the village, the earth releasing the heat of the day. Birds began to stir faintly, and a first hint of light touched the horizon. The laborer shifted, feeling the familiar pull of morning. Even in this new world, life demanded attention. The day would bring work as essential and unrelenting as the one that had just ended. Yet this moment of stillness, the quiet between night and day, carried a small comfort, a recognition that, despite change, despite uncertainty, the rhythms of life remained, rooted in simple, enduring routines. As the horizon brightened with the softest tinge of gold, the village slowly awakened. Animals stirred, doors creaked open, and the first steps of early risers sounded on the uneven paths. The laborer rose, stretching and rubbing sleep from his eyes, preparing once again to face the tasks of tending fields, animals, and home. Though the grandeur and order of Rome were gone, the cycle of day and night, of labor and rest, continued unabated. The family moved with practiced efficiency, knowing that each action mattered, that survival and small prosperity depended on care, attention, and perseverance. The early morning light revealed a village transformed by circumstance but unbroken in spirit. Roofs patched with timber and clay, fences reinforced with stones, and fields tilled by countless hands bore silent testimony to human resilience. The laborers' gaze swept over the landscape, noting both the challenges and the small triumphs, a garden patch thriving, a goat returning safely to its pen, the children laughing quietly as they helped with chores. Life, though harder and less certain than in the days of Rome, continued to flow steadily, a quiet stream of survival, care, and enduring routine. With the first warmth of the sun touching rooftops and fields, the laborer began another day, just as he had countless times before. Work would continue, as it always had, framed by the subtle guidance of the natural world and the steady pulse of family and community. Though the empire's influence had faded into history, the essential elements of daily life, effort, vigilance, connection, and quiet joys, remained as anchors in a changing world. And in this simple, enduring rhythm, the villagers found purpose, stability, and the reassurance that life. As afternoon waned, the sun began to lean toward the western horizon, casting long, slanting shadows across the village and fields. The once busy streets, now quieter, echoed with the soft sounds of labor winding down. Chickens clucked as they returned to coops, goats grazed lazily in fenced enclosures, and the occasional dog padded along uneven paths, sniffing at the dust. The laborer, his back sore and hands calloused, moved deliberately among the animals, checking for signs of fatigue or illness. In this new world, attentiveness to every detail was essential, for the absence of imperial oversight had left no margin for negligence. The family's work extended beyond mere survival, it required maintenance of structures and routines that once had been supported by the empire. Roofs patched with clay tiles and timber were inspected, fences reinforced where storms had weakened them, and paths cleared of stones or debris that could hinder movement. The laborer and his children carried water from the well one last time, filling the small storage containers that would see the household through the night. Even these seemingly simple tasks required care, patience, and foresight, shaping a rhythm of life that blended effort with quiet observation. The garden, though modest, remained central to their survival. The mother and children worked together, harvesting the remaining vegetables of the day, beans, cabbages, and a few small root crops. Each movement was purposeful, reflecting a deep knowledge of soil, season, and plant behavior. The vegetables were carefully gathered, sorted, and stored, ready to supplement the thin evening meal. The laborer paused for a moment, feeling the warm sun on his back and the gentle breeze against his face, savoring the small successes that daily labor brought. These were victories of persistence, skill, and attention to the world around them. By late afternoon, the laborer began guiding animals back toward their pens, calling the goats with practiced familiarity. Chickens were herded into their coop, and the pig was secured in its small pen. The laborer's attention to detail ensured that no strays were lost, for in a world without the protection of a distant empire, each animal carried weight, both practical and symbolic, representing sustenance, security, and the results of patient care. The children followed closely, helping where they could, carrying bundles of straw or scattered feed, learning lessons that went far beyond simple chores. As the sun dipped lower, the village began to take on a softer, golden hue. Dust settled into quiet layers over streets and fields, and the air cooled gently. Families moved slowly, finishing the day's work with deliberate, unhurried motions. The laborer returned to his home, where his wife had prepared a simple evening meal of porridge, bread, and vegetables. The smell of cooking filled the small room, mingling with the scent of smoke from the hearth. The family gathered around their modest table, sharing the fruits of their labor in quiet contentment, understanding that each bite represented effort, cooperation, and survival in a world now defined by self-reliance. Outside, the village settled further into evening calm. Fences, rooftops, and walls reflected the fading light, revealing both the wear of time and the care taken to maintain what remained. Evenings were a time of reflection and planning, tomorrow's tasks could be anticipated, and small adjustments made to ensure continued survival. The laborer paused at the doorway, taking in the scene, a child chasing a chicken back into the coop, a neighbor carrying water from a distant well, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the surrounding trees. Life, though less ordered than before, was steady and deliberate, guided by human attention and effort rather than imperial decree. As twilight deepened, shadows lengthened and the air cooled further. Fires flickered softly in the hearts of homes across the village, casting warm light on walls and faces. The laborer guided the children in final tasks for the day, gathering leftover firewood, securing doors, and ensuring animals were safely enclosed for the night. Each movement was deliberate, practiced, and necessary. In this new world, survival depended on consistent, careful action, and the family moved together in quiet, coordinated rhythm. By evening's end, the village had settled into stillness. The laborer and his family gathered near the hearth, their day complete. Outside, the faint sounds of wildlife, an owl, the distant rustle of trees, reminded them of the untamed world that lay just beyond the village boundaries. Within the home, warmth, light, and the presence of loved ones provided a quiet reassurance. The empire had fallen, but life continued. The simple, measured routines of work, care, and family had become a new structure, replacing distant authority with immediate, tangible responsibility. Night had fully settled over the village, draping rooftops and fields in a deep, velvety darkness. The last traces of sunlight had faded, leaving only a faint glow on the horizon. The village, once lively and bright under the Roman sun, now lay quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a night bird. Inside the laborer's modest home, the hearth glowed warmly, casting flickering light across walls lined with simple tools, woven mats, and clay vessels. The family had completed their evening meal, and now moved through the final tasks of the day with a calm precision shaped by necessity. The laborer inspected the small pens once more, checking the goats and chickens to ensure none were restless or injured. The pig, comfortably settled in its muddy corner, snorted softly as he passed. Each animal had become a center of attention, their well-being directly tied to the family's survival. Without the distant protection of an empire, vigilance was constant, yet it carried a quiet rhythm, almost meditative in its repetition. The children followed, eager to help, carrying straw, scattered feed, or small tools to assist in completing the chores. Their movements were careful but playful, a reminder that even amidst the hardships, life contained moments of simplicity and joy. Within the home, the mother prepared a small batch of herbal tea, heating water over the fire and carefully mixing leaves she had collected from the surrounding fields. The aroma filled the room, mingling with the lingering scent of the evening meal. Each gesture carried intention, measuring the leaves, ensuring the water did not boil too fiercely, and pouring it into simple clay cups. The family drank slowly, savoring warmth and a brief moment of togetherness. These quiet rituals of evening offered comfort, structure, and a sense of normalcy in a world where larger order had faded into memory. The village streets, now empty, seemed vast and almost untamed. Shadows stretched across broken fences and uneven paths, and the air carried the faint chill of night. The laborer paused at the doorway, gazing outward, listening to the subtle sounds of life beyond the home, the rustle of a small animal moving through underbrush, the faint crack of a branch underfoot, and the distant murmur of neighbors completing their own evening routines. In these moments, the fragility of their existence was apparent, yet so too was the strength that came from adaptation, skill, and shared effort. As the family completed their final chores, the laborer guided the children to bed. Their small bodies nestled into straw mats, blankets wrapped tightly around them. Even the youngest, once fidgeting or distracted, now lay still, soothed by routine and the comforting presence of family. The mother extinguished the small fire, leaving only embers glowing faintly, while the laborer moved around the room, ensuring doors were secure and tools set safely aside. Each small act was deliberate, guarding the fragile bubble of safety that surrounded them in a world that had grown unpredictable. Outside, the animals settled into their enclosures. Chickens huddled together, goats lay quietly, and the pig's breathing became slow and steady. The village, though lacking the bustling order of Roman oversight, had its own rhythm, the gentle pulse of life that persisted without fanfare, shaped by the care and attention of those who remained. The laborer walked once more through the small garden, brushing his hands over the last harvested vegetables, ensuring everything was stored and protected from potential nighttime threats. Every action reinforced the continuity of life, the subtle power of diligence, and the quiet assertion of control over the immediate world. Finally, as night deepened, the laborer returned to his mat. Exhaustion pressed gently into his bones, reminder of the day's labor, yet satisfaction accompanied the fatigue. Outside, the wind rustled through trees, carrying the faint scent of earth, smoke, and distant wildflowers. Within the home, the family rested in a cocoon of warmth and quiet, the flickering embers of the fire casting soft shadows on the walls. Life, ordinary and meticulous, had continued in full, guided by routine, care, and patience. Though the empire had crumbled, the basic structures of human perseverance, work, vigilance, and family, remained steadfast, anchoring them to each other and to the land. Sleep came gently, slow and deep. The laborer's mind drifted over the day's labors, tending fields, guiding animals, repairing fences, and nurturing his family. Each memory was a small triumph, evidence of resilience in a world now defined by its unpredictability. Outside, the village lay still, the night calm, yet alive with quiet motions. Life endured, anchored in the ordinary, the patient, and the essential. Before dawn, the village lay in complete stillness. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth and morning dew. The laborer stirred lightly on his straw mat, awakening to the subtle pull of the first light brushing the horizon. Outside, faint rustles indicated that the animals were beginning to move, sensing the approach of a new day. Chickens shifted in their coops, goats stirred and stretched, and the pig snuffled softly in the corner of its pen. Though the world beyond the village remained unpredictable, the familiar sounds of the home and the farm offered reassurance and structure. The laborer rose carefully, stretching muscles still tender from the previous day's work. Each movement was deliberate, conserving energy while preparing to meet the tasks that awaited. He first attended to the animals, guiding goats to small patches of grass, scattering feed for the chickens, and checking the pig's pen. Each action was routine yet vital, ensuring that the day would begin smoothly and that the family's sustenance remained secure. The children, roused by the gentle activity, assisted quietly, carrying small baskets or helping to scatter feed. Their movements were slower at first, weighed down by sleep, but gradually gained rhythm as they joined the laborer in the work of tending life's necessities. The laborer's wife began preparing a simple breakfast, heating water over the hearth for porridge and gathering vegetables from the previous day's harvest. The aroma of warm grains mingled with the earthy scents of the village, signaling the start of a new cycle. The family worked in careful harmony, each movement precise, each action considered. Life had become an intricate pattern of labor, observation, and care, and even these small routines carried profound meaning. Every meal prepared, every tool mended, every animal cared for was a demonstration of resilience and foresight, a quiet assertion that life could endure despite the absence of imperial order. As the sun gradually rose, spilling soft gold over rooftops and fields, the village awakened fully. Birds sang from rooftops and trees, the wind rustled through leaves, and distant hills reflected the morning light. The laborer stepped outside briefly, feeling the warmth of the sun on his back and surveying the land. The garden, modest yet vital, was tended with care. Rows of vegetables stretched unevenly, some leaning toward the sun, others hidden beneath leaves and stems. Every plant was a marker of persistence, cultivated with patient hands in a world no longer guided by distant authority. The village itself began to hum quietly with activity. Neighbors emerged from their homes, tending fires, gathering water, and preparing for the day ahead. The rough streets, worn and dusty, carried the sounds of daily labor, the scrape of tools against stone, the clatter of wooden carts, and the occasional bleat of goats or crow of a rooster. Though travel was limited and commerce smaller in scale, the community remained interconnected, each family aware of its neighbors and dependent on shared effort and mutual vigilance. In the absence of empire, social bonds had tightened, forming a fabric of support and cooperation that structured daily life. By mid-morning, the laborer had guided the children to small tasks, ensuring that both they and the animals were settled. The garden required attention, weeds were pulled, vegetables collected, and soil lightly tended. The laborer moved deliberately through the rows, noting subtle changes, dry patches needing water, leaves affected by pests, plants leaning toward the light. Each observation informed the day's labor, requiring careful decision-making and attention. The children assisted when possible, learning to identify the small details that ensured survival. Every motion, every small choice, reinforced the rhythm of life in this changed world. The laborer paused to catch his breath, feeling the warmth of the sun increase gradually. He glanced toward the distant hills, reflecting on the transformation since the empire's decline. Life had slowed, yet it had gained an intimacy absent in the days of distant authority. The rhythms of work, care, and observation demanded constant attention, but they also nurtured a deep understanding of the land, the seasons, and the people who inhabited the village. Each day became a meditation on survival and endurance, a slow, deliberate dance with the natural world. As the morning progressed, the family settled into the familiar cadence of labor. Meals were prepared with care, tools were inspected and mended, and animals were guided to pastures or pens. The quiet sounds of work, rustling leaves, distant clucks, the scrape of hands on rough wood, filled the air. Life, stripped of grandeur, now revolved around necessity, vigilance, and modest achievements. By late morning, the sun had climbed higher, bathing the village in warm, steady light. Shadows of uneven rooftops and leaning fences stretched across the dusty streets. The laborer moved through the garden, checking each row of vegetables with careful attention. Leaves were examined for signs of pests, soil turned lightly with his hands to ensure it retained moisture, and the ripest vegetables were collected and stored. Each motion was deliberate, almost meditative, reflecting a life shaped by constant vigilance and deep familiarity with the land. The children moved alongside him, carrying small baskets and helping to gather vegetables or collect kindling for the hearth. Their bare feet moved over stones and dirt paths, treading carefully to avoid obstacles, their hands learning precision through repetition. They occasionally paused to watch a beetle crawling along a leaf or a bird hopping along the fence, small moments of curiosity and learning woven into the fabric of daily work. Life, even in its simplicity, contained lessons and discoveries if one paid attention. Beyond the immediate garden, the laborer checked on the animals. The goats were calm, nibbling at tender grass near the fence line, while chickens clucked quietly, pecking at scattered grain. The pig rolled lazily in a small muddy corner of the pen, stretching as the morning warmth reached its back. Each animal was vital to the family's survival, and tending them required observation, patience, and gentle authority. The absence of Rome's protection meant that the laborer alone, along with his family, bore the responsibility for safeguarding their resources, and every small success reinforced their sense of resilience and agency. Nearby, other villagers performed similar routines. Women carried water from the well, balancing clay jugs on their heads, while men repaired tools, patched fences, or guided animals to pastures. The rough streets and uneven terrain carried the faint echo of human activity, the scrape of wood against stone, the soft thump of a bucket being set down, the occasional bleat or cluck from animals. Despite the diminished scale of life compared to the days of imperial order, there remained a quiet coordination, a rhythm born of necessity and shared knowledge. The village functioned as a single organism, each person's effort supporting the whole. The laborer returned briefly to the hearth, where his wife had begun preparing the midday meal. Simple porridge and bread were supplemented with vegetables from the garden and a small portion of goat's milk. Every meal reflected the day's labor and the careful planning necessary for survival. The family moved quietly, speaking sparingly, their actions conveying the efficiency and understanding that the absence of empire had demanded. Even in silence, there was communication, shared glances, small gestures, and the smooth coordination of tasks that ensured the household functioned effectively. By mid-morning, the sun's warmth had fully reached the rooftops and fields, making movement slower and deliberate. The laborer guided the animals back toward the garden and fields, ensuring that they did not stray or damage crops. The children followed, learning not only the practical skills of tending animals but also the awareness required to live in a world where safety and abundance could no longer be taken for granted. Every day, every motion, and every decision carried significance. Survival depended on attention to small details and careful planning. The garden and the animals were the lifeblood of the household. The laborer inspected the soil again, turning it lightly, removing weeds, and checking for early signs of disease in plants. The animals were fed and watered, and each action was a quiet assertion of control and care over the family's immediate environment. The village, while quieter and less organized than under Roman authority, remained alive with a steady pulse of labor and observation. Life had slowed in scale but intensified in its requirement for attentiveness, diligence, and understanding of the natural rhythms of the land. The laborer paused briefly to rest, leaning against a fence and feeling the sun's warmth on his back. The sounds of the village surrounded him, a chicken pecking near the gate, a goat bleating softly, the faint scrape of a neighbor repairing a tool. The family worked in tandem, each movement coordinated and purposeful. Though the empire had fallen, life persisted through the patience, skill, and quiet persistence of ordinary people. Every action reinforced continuity and survival, binding the household to the land and to the subtle patterns of daily existence. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, the warmth became more pronounced, and the village slowed under the heat of the day. The laborer guided the animals to shaded areas near the fences, ensuring they rested while still grazing. The goats huddled under trees or leaned against fences, chewing quietly, while the chickens found patches of shadow beneath low shrubs and porches. Even the pig, reluctant to leave the cool mud of its pen, settled comfortably, snuffling softly at the cooling soil. Careful attention to these small details ensured the survival and comfort of the household, an essential aspect of life in a world no longer overseen by distant authority. The family paused briefly for a small mid-morning break, sipping water and eating a few morsels of bread. Though the meal was modest, it represented both sustenance and accomplishment, a reward for the steady labor of tending animals and gardens. The children rested on the edges of the yard, fanning themselves with small pieces of wood and watching a few insects scuttle across the dirt. Their laughter was quiet but steady, an unspoken rhythm threading through the day, a reminder that even amidst simplicity and hardship, moments of lightness and curiosity persisted. After the brief respite, the laborer returned to the garden to inspect the vegetables once more. Rows of cabbages and beans were carefully examined, leaves turned over to check for pests, soil loosened to allow air and water to reach the roots, and ripe produce harvested for the midday meal. Every movement reflected skill, patience, and a deep understanding of the rhythms of growth. The children joined him again, carrying baskets and learning the patterns of care, the small signs of plant health, and the necessity of tending crops daily. Life, once supported by the far-reaching infrastructure of Rome, now demanded direct and intimate involvement with every aspect of survival. The midday sun highlighted the subtle textures of the village, cracked clay rooftops, uneven paths worn by generations, leaning fences reinforced with stones and wood. The laborer paused to observe these small details, acknowledging both the fragility and resilience of their surroundings. Every repair, every patch of garden, every carefully tended animal contributed to the continued functioning of the household. Life had become a series of deliberate choices, each carrying consequences, teaching attentiveness, skill, and patience in ways that the empire's grand structures had once obscured. By noon, the family moved inside to prepare the simple meal. Porridge was warmed over the hearth, vegetables boiled or roasted, and small portions of goat's milk added to the meal. The laborer's wife worked methodically, chopping, stirring, and arranging, while the children helped with small tasks, carrying bowls, stirring porridge, or washing vegetables. The meal was shared quietly, each bite a tangible result of the morning's labor and careful planning. The modesty of the food belied its significance, sustenance, stability, and continuity in a world where external systems of support no longer existed. After the meal, the family took a short rest. The laborer leaned against the doorway, feeling the warmth of the sun, listening to the soft hum of village life, birds calling, a goat bleating softly, the distant sound of a neighbor hammering a fence. The air carried the mixed scents of earth, herbs, and smoke from the hearth. Even in this heat, the family moved with purpose, preparing for the afternoon's work, tending more distant plots of land, repairing tools, and ensuring that animals remained safe and healthy. Every day followed a pattern shaped by necessity, awareness, and intimate knowledge of their surroundings. The children, energized by the break, played lightly in the yard, collecting small sticks or chasing shadows, their laughter punctuating the calm afternoon. The laborer watched for a moment, reflecting on the continuity of life despite the collapse of Roman order. These simple patterns, work, care, play, observation, formed the structure of existence now, steady and deliberate, resilient in the absence of external control. Each day built upon the last, creating a rhythm both grounding and necessary, sustaining the family and the small community that surrounded them. By the time the sun reached its peak, the village was settled into a slow, deliberate rhythm. The laborer prepared to return to the fields, moving among animals and garden plots, planning the work of the afternoon. The family followed their quiet routine, each member contributing to survival and stability. In this ordinary cycle of labor and rest, observation and care, the traces of history, both of empire and its collapse, were embedded into the texture of daily life. The world beyond the village had grown unpredictable, yet within these modest bounds, life endured, shaped by effort, vigilance, and quiet resilience. As the sun began its descent past the highest point in the sky, the village carried a gentle, steady rhythm. Shadows lengthened across the uneven streets and patchwork fields, and the air grew warmer, heavy with the scent of earth and dust stirred by the morning's labor. The laborer moved among the animals one last time before the main meal, checking that the goats and chickens were safe, that the pig remained settled in its muddy corner. Each motion was deliberate and careful, the absence of imperial protection demanded vigilance, even in these familiar tasks. The children, now accustomed to the cadence of daily chores, assisted with quiet efficiency. One carried a small basket of fresh water, another scattered grain for the chickens, while a third helped guide a goat back toward the shaded area near the garden. Every gesture was small, yet essential. The family operated as a single, interdependent unit, each member's contribution reinforcing the delicate balance of life within the village. In this way, the collapse of larger systems had intensified local cooperation, knitting together household and community with necessity and care. Inside the home, the mother prepared the midday meal with practiced skill. Simple porridge was heated over the hearth, supplemented with boiled vegetables and a small portion of goat's milk. The aroma spread through the modest dwelling, mingling with the lingering scents of herbs and wood smoke. The laborer joined in, setting bowls, stirring porridge, and ensuring all were ready. The family moved quietly, aware that the sustenance before them reflected hours of labor, attention, and careful planning. Every action was a small triumph, a reminder that life persisted despite the absence of imperial order. Once the meal was shared, the family took a short period of rest. The children lay in the shade, their small hands playing with loose strands of straw or pebbles, while the laborer and his wife leaned back against the walls, catching brief moments of calm before the afternoon's tasks began. Even in rest, the village's rhythm was present, the faint bleating of goats, the soft clucking of chickens, the distant scrape of wood from a neighbor repairing a fence. These quiet details were a constant undercurrent, grounding the family in a life defined by observation, patience, and careful attention. By early afternoon, the sun warmed the rooftops and fields fully, casting the village in bright, golden light. The laborer guided the animals again, ensuring grazing areas were sufficient and that no creature wandered too far. Goats nibbled cautiously at the tender grass along fence lines, while chickens scratched the earth for scattered grains. Each task was performed with deliberate care, the repeated motions forming a rhythm that structured the day and reassured the family that all was under control. The garden required ongoing attention. The laborer inspected each row of vegetables, loosening soil, pulling weeds, and checking for any signs of disease. The children followed, learning to recognize the subtle signs of healthy plants, the small details that determined whether crops would thrive. Life had become an intimate dance with the natural world, shaped not by distant authorities but by hands-on effort, careful observation, and continuous care. Each action reinforced both survival and a quiet mastery of the environment, fostering a resilience born from necessity. Meanwhile, the village streets moved slowly with other families engaged in similar routines. Water was fetched from wells, fences repaired, and small household tasks completed. The sounds of labor were soft but persistent, the scrape of wood, the thump of stones, the distant call of birds and animals. Life now revolved around a careful balance of work, observation, and care, each day shaped by repetition, attention, and the steady passage of time. Even the smallest actions, whether mending a tool or securing a pen, carried significance and reinforced the structure of life within the community. By mid-afternoon, the laborer paused briefly, leaning against a fence to rest and surveying the village. The warmth of the sun pressed gently against his back, and the faint scent of dust and herbs filled the air. Around him, the village continued its quiet rhythm, each family member and neighbor contributing to the shared flow of life. Though the grandeur and protection of the empire were gone, the ordinary cycles of labor, care, and small triumphs persisted. Survival depended on attention, patience, and steady effort, and the village, small and humble, endured because of it. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the village was bathed in a soft, golden light. Shadows stretched long across uneven streets and fields, lending the familiar landscape a quiet, contemplative atmosphere. The laborer moved deliberately among the animals, guiding goats to their pens, gathering chickens that had wandered too far, and checking the pig, which wallowed lazily in its muddy corner. Every task was performed with steady care, a practiced rhythm that ensured survival and safety in the absence of distant authority. The children followed, carrying small baskets of feed or water, learning through repetition the careful attention required to maintain the household. Their movements, though light and playful at times, were purposeful, part of a broader cycle of work that connected every member of the family to the immediate needs of life. Even in these ordinary tasks, a subtle education unfolded, the understanding of animal behavior, the recognition of signs in the soil and plants, and the awareness that small actions carried significant consequences. Inside the home, the mother prepared a modest evening meal. The hearth glowed warmly, casting flickering light on walls lined with simple tools, woven mats, and clay vessels. Porridge and boiled vegetables, supplemented with a small portion of goat's milk, were arranged on the table. The laborer joined in, helping to set bowls and stirring porridge as the family gathered around. Conversation was minimal, the day had been long, and the work had been steady. Actions, gestures, and shared understanding conveyed more than words ever could. Every meal was a testament to the family's diligence, care, and quiet resilience. Outside, the village streets grew calmer as neighbors completed their own chores. Women carried water from wells for the last time, repairing small items along the way, while men guided animals back to pens and inspected fences. The air was filled with subtle, ambient sounds, the soft bleating of goats, the cluck of returning chickens, and the distant scrape of wood being set in place. Even as activity slowed, the rhythm of village life persisted, a continuous pulse shaped by necessity and attentiveness. By late afternoon, the laborer checked the garden one final time. The harvested vegetables were stored safely, and the remaining plants were inspected, weeds removed, and soil loosened. Each plant represented both effort and sustenance, a tangible reward for steady care. The children, assisting where possible, carried small tools or helped collect fallen produce. Through these routines, the family reinforced knowledge, skill, and responsibility, practical lessons born from daily engagement with the land and animals, lessons that had become vital in the absence of structured oversight. As the sun dipped lower, warmth softened and shadows deepened. The laborer guided the animals into their final resting places for the night, goats nestled in pens, chickens crowded together in the coop, and the pig comfortably settled in its corner. The village grew quiet, save for occasional distant sounds from neighboring homes or the wind moving through trees. The fading light highlighted both the fragility and endurance of the settlement, roofs patched with clay, fences reinforced with stones and timber, and fields tilled and maintained through steady effort. Evening chores concluded, the family gathered near the hearth. Small fires flickered in homes throughout the village, casting warm light and soft shadows. The laborer's hands, rough from the day's work, rested briefly as he observed his children playing quietly with straw and small stones. The mother tended the fire, preparing a small herbal infusion, while the laborer reflected on the day's labor. The animals fed and sheltered, the garden tended, fences repaired, and the household sustained. Each completed task was a subtle victory, an assertion of order and care in a world that no longer provided protection or structure beyond the immediate home. Finally, as twilight deepened into night, the family prepared for rest. Doors and windows were secured, fires reduced to embers, and the home settled into a quiet rhythm of comfort and security. Outside, shadows stretched across the village, the faint sounds of nocturnal animals weaving through the still air. Life, ordinary yet profound, continued in its measured patterns. Though the empire had fallen, the patient rhythm of labor, care, and observation ensured that survival and continuity endured, one day after another. The laborer lay on his straw mat, exhausted yet satisfied, listening to the soft breathing of his children and the quiet crackle of the hearth. The day had been ordinary, repetitive, and challenging, yet within it lay the essence of resilience: work completed, family cared for, and the household sustained. Before the first light touched the horizon, the village lay in deep, peaceful silence. The air was cool and dense with the scent of dew-soaked earth and the faint aroma of smoke from dying embers in hearths. The laborer stirred slightly on his straw mat, waking to the subtle chorus of the night, distant hoots of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the soft movements of animals shifting in their pens. Though the empire that had once ruled vast lands was gone, the familiar patterns of life, work, care, vigilance, remained, anchoring him in a comforting rhythm that the darkness could not disturb. Rising carefully, he moved through the home with practiced efficiency. The children still slept, curled beneath blankets, while the mother quietly stirred the coals in the hearth, coaxing warmth for the early morning. The laborer first attended to the animals, guiding goats from their pens to shaded areas, scattering feed for chickens, and checking the pig's muddy corner. Every movement was deliberate, informed by a deep understanding of animal behavior, the rhythms of day and night, and the necessity of careful observation in a world without imperial protection. Outside, the faint glow of dawn began to color the sky. A soft pink light stretched over the rooftops and fields, illuminating the village in muted hues. The laborer paused briefly, inhaling the cool, earthy air, listening to the first tentative chirps of birds awakening. Even in the absence of distant authority, the world remained structured by the cycles of nature, and the village moved in sync with these rhythms. The animals stirred, responding instinctively to light and warmth, while the children began to rouse, drawn by movement and quiet sounds of early labor. The garden awaited inspection. The laborer walked along familiar rows, loosening soil, checking for signs of disease or pests, and ensuring that every plant had space to grow. The children followed, learning not only practical skills but also the attentiveness and patience required to live in a world where daily survival depended on careful observation. Each harvested vegetable, each weed removed, was a small affirmation of skill, diligence, and continuity. Life had slowed in scale compared to the grandeur of Rome, yet it had gained intimacy, requiring the hands, eyes, and minds of those who remained. The mother prepared a modest breakfast over the hearth. Water heated slowly, porridge was stirred, and vegetables from the previous day were arranged to accompany the meal. The family moved with quiet coordination, each member knowing their role and contributing with efficiency born of habit and necessity. Conversation was minimal, gestures, glances, and shared movements conveyed understanding. Every meal was both sustenance and evidence of a day begun in diligence, a continuation of the patterns that shaped survival. By early morning, the village streets were filled with subtle activity. Neighbors moved about, carrying water from wells, tending animals, and repairing structures. The sounds were gentle but persistent, the scrape of wood, soft bleats from goats, the distant call of a crow. Life, once directed and maintained by imperial oversight, now relied entirely on local knowledge, skill, and cooperation. The laborer observed the rhythm of movement, noting small details, the angle of a roof repaired with patched clay, a fence reinforced with stones, or the careful arrangement of harvested crops. Each detail carried significance, ensuring that both household and community endured. The children began to engage in small tasks alongside their parents, gathering water, scattering feed, carrying harvested vegetables. These routines were quiet lessons in responsibility and survival, reinforcing the knowledge and skills that allowed the household to persist. Even in repetition, there was meaning. Every action contributed to stability, continuity, and resilience. The village moved as a collective organism, each household linked through necessity and observation, sustaining life through care and attentiveness. As the sun rose further, its warm light spread across the village, highlighting the textures of roofs, fences, and soil. The laborer paused to take in the scene, the small figures of children tending animals, neighbors moving along paths, the glint of water in clay jugs, and the soft green of garden plants nourished by careful attention. Though Rome had fallen, and the grandeur of its order had faded, life persisted in these ordinary yet profound acts. The quiet, measured rhythm of survival continued, guiding the family and their neighbors through cycles of work, care, and rest, anchoring them to the land and to each other in a world reshaped by history. By late morning, the sun had climbed higher, warming the village and fields with steady intensity. Dust rose faintly from the paths as the laborer moved among the animals and garden rows. Goats nibbled at the tender grass, chickens scratched the earth, and the pig wallowed quietly in its pen, all part of a rhythm that required constant vigilance. In this post-Roman world, each task, feeding, guiding, inspecting, carried immediate consequences. The absence of imperial authority meant the family's survival relied entirely on careful attention and steady effort. The laborer returned to the garden, inspecting rows of cabbages, beans, and root vegetables. Soil was loosened, weeds removed, and ripening produce carefully harvested. Each plant reflected the day's labor and the previous day's care, a tangible measure of diligence and skill. The children followed, carrying small baskets or assisting in gentle tasks, their hands learning the precise movements that ensured crops thrived. In contrast to life under the empire, where large-scale structures had obscured individual effort, survival now depended on the attentiveness of each household member. Beyond the immediate garden, the laborer checked the fences and boundary markers. Some sections were reinforced with stones or wooden stakes, patched with care to protect animals and crops from wandering or theft. The careful repair of these small structures became a daily ritual, a quiet reflection of human diligence against the unpredictability of a world without distant oversight. Every stroke of effort, every nail hammered, every stone adjusted, reinforced the continuity of life. The village depended not on grand authority, but on persistent, thoughtful attention to detail. Nearby, other villagers moved in similar rhythms. Women carried water from wells and tended their own gardens, men guided animals or mended tools, and children assisted in small but essential ways. The village moved collectively, coordinated by shared knowledge, necessity, and subtle observation rather than formal hierarchy. Though the scale of life had shrunk from the vast empire, the depth of responsibility for survival had grown. Daily labor became a careful negotiation with the land, the animals, and the fragile stability of the household. The laborer paused briefly, feeling the warmth of the sun pressing on his back, the faint scent of dust, herbs, and smoke mingling in the air. He watched the children tending small tasks, their movements careful and deliberate. Every action, no matter how small, had significance: water carried to the garden, a fence reinforced, vegetables harvested. These simple acts, repetitive and unremarkable in isolation, combined to form the foundation of survival, continuity, and quiet resilience. Life demanded attention, patience, and care, qualities that the structures of the fallen empire had once rendered less immediate. By mid-morning, the family paused briefly to eat a small meal: bread, porridge, and milk from the goats. Each bite reflected the cumulative effort of the morning and previous days, a tangible result of patience and diligence. The children rested for a moment, sitting in shaded areas of the garden or yard, while the laborer and his wife surveyed their work. Even in these short pauses, the rhythm of survival persisted, observing animals, assessing the garden, noting tasks for the afternoon. In a world without distant authority, every small decision carried weight, every observation informed future labor. The sun continued its ascent, brightening the village and emphasizing textures of roofs, walls, and fields. Dust from footpaths rose in the gentle breeze, swirling around the laborer's feet as he moved among animals and plants. Each action remained deliberate, every gesture part of an ongoing negotiation with the land and the surrounding environment. Life in this post-Roman village was no longer shaped by the distant authority of a vast empire but by the patient, continuous, and attentive work of ordinary people. By the time the laborer had completed the morning's primary tasks, the village settled into a temporary lull. The animals rested, the children played lightly while observing the garden, and the family gathered briefly to consider the work ahead. Life was slower than it had been in the bustling days of Rome, yet it demanded a different intensity, mindfulness, care, and an intimate understanding of the natural world. Each day was a cycle of labor, sustenance, and observation, a rhythm that shaped both survival and identity in a world forever changed by the collapse of imperial order. As the sun reached its zenith, casting strong, warm light across the village, the laborer guided the animals toward areas with more shade. The goats huddled under the low branches of trees, nibbling cautiously at sparse patches of grass. Chickens scratched gently in the softened soil, while the pig rested comfortably in its muddy corner, turning occasionally to enjoy the coolness of the earth. Each movement, however small, reflected a careful consideration of the animal's needs, for in a world without imperial protection, vigilance ensured both sustenance and safety. The garden demanded attention as well. The laborer inspected each row of vegetables, loosening soil, removing any weeds, and harvesting the ripest produce. Each plant was a testament to yesterday's labor and the ongoing cycle of care required for survival. The children assisted when possible, carrying small baskets, gathering scattered leaves, or helping to water the plants. Through these repetitive tasks, they learned patience, attentiveness, and the subtle signs of healthy growth. In the absence of Rome's grand infrastructure, survival depended on the intimate knowledge of one's land and its rhythms. Nearby, other villagers moved in harmony with the rising heat. Women carried water from distant wells, balancing jugs carefully on their heads, while men repaired fences or mended tools. Soft sounds of labor filled the village, the clatter of stones, the scrape of wood against clay, the occasional bleat of an animal, and the faint rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Though life had shrunk in scale compared to the days of the empire, it required greater attentiveness and personal responsibility, binding each household and the broader community together through necessity and shared experience. The laborer paused briefly to rest in the shade, feeling the warmth of the sun on his back while observing the movements of his children. One carefully carried a watering bucket, another gathered a few loose sticks to support plants, and a third watched over a goat that had wandered slightly. Every small action contributed to the household's continued survival, and the laborer recognized the significance of repetition and attentiveness. In this changed world, mastery over these small daily tasks became as important as any law or decree once enforced by the empire. By midday, the family took a brief pause for a small meal. Bread, porridge, and a few vegetables were consumed slowly, a quiet acknowledgement of the morning's work. The children rested in the shade of the garden or small outbuildings, while the laborer and his wife surveyed their domain, the animals safely grazing, the garden flourishing under care, and the fences standing firm against the wind or wandering wildlife. Even these modest accomplishments offered reassurance and a sense of continuity in a life now defined by self-reliance. As the sun climbed higher, dust rose faintly from the paths, swirling around the family as they moved. Every action, from checking fences to tending the garden or guiding animals, required mindfulness. In the post-Roman world, the absence of external authority meant that every household functioned as its own governing body, reliant on knowledge, foresight, and steady effort. The day unfolded as a careful balance of labor and observation, each task nested within a broader rhythm that ensured survival. The children resumed small duties, carrying water, scattering feed, and assisting with minor repairs. Through these acts, they learned not only practical skills but also the discipline and patience that sustained life in a world reshaped by history. Each small success, whether a ripened vegetable harvested or a fence reinforced, was a quiet triumph, evidence that daily attention and steady work could protect and maintain the fragile equilibrium of the household. By the time the laborer had completed these tasks, the village settled into a slow, deliberate hum. Animals rested or grazed quietly, the children moved with careful purpose, and neighbors carried out parallel routines in their own yards. Life, stripped of the grandeur and oversight of the empire, persisted through continuity, patience, and observation. Each day, each task, and each attentive gesture reinforced a rhythm that was ordinary, repetitive, yet profoundly sustaining, a cycle of care, labor, and quiet resilience that ensured the household endured. As the sun climbed toward its highest point, the warmth grew heavier over the village. Dust rose gently from the paths, swirling around the feet of the laborer and his children as they moved through the small yard. The animals, sensing the intensity of the heat, huddled in shaded areas. Goats leaned against fences or nestled under low branches, while chickens clustered beneath shrubs, scratching idly at the soil. The pig, with its back turned toward the sun, rested in its familiar muddy corner, its breathing slow and measured. Each of these routines, though seemingly simple, reflected careful attention and intimate knowledge of the land and creatures that sustained the household. The laborer returned to the garden to check the soil once more. The rows of vegetables required constant observation, a patch of beans needed loosening, a wilted leaf on a cabbage demanded removal, and small pests had to be gently brushed away before they could threaten the harvest. Every plant told a story of care and diligence, of the laborer's repeated attention over days and weeks. The children followed, carrying small baskets or fetching water from a nearby jar, learning through practice the patterns of life that ensured survival. In this world, every small act had weight, and every moment of attention mattered. The village, though quieter than in the days of Rome, maintained its own steady rhythm. Neighbors moved along the paths, balancing water jugs or repairing fences, their activities synchronized through shared knowledge and necessity rather than formal orders. The laborer noted the subtle details of this human choreography, a gate patched with clay and stone, a roof slightly lifted to allow ventilation, a child carrying food to a nearby pen. Even in the absence of empire, life thrived through these deliberate, coordinated actions. By midday, the family paused for another small meal. Bread and porridge, supplemented by boiled vegetables and milk, were consumed slowly, the taste of each bite reflecting the morning's labor. The children rested briefly, lying in the shade or playing quietly near the garden, while the laborer surveyed his surroundings. Animals were secure, the garden tended, fences intact. The morning's work, though repetitive and physically demanding, reinforced the household's ability to persist. Survival now depended not on imperial protection but on meticulous care and the steady execution of routine. After the meal, the laborer attended to minor repairs. A loose fence board was replaced, a small section of the garden's irrigation path reinforced, and the edges of the storage area tidied. These small, deliberate acts maintained both the household's physical structure and a sense of order in an unpredictable world. The children assisted, carrying tools or small items as instructed, learning not only skill but also patience and attentiveness. Each moment became a lesson in responsibility and continuity, a tangible way to engage with the world in the absence of large-scale authority. As the sun reached its zenith, casting bright light across the village and fields, the laborer paused to rest in the shade of the garden fence. The wind carried the faint scent of herbs and earth, mingling with the warmth of the sun and the subtle odors of animals and cooking fires. Around him, the village moved with quiet diligence, neighbors tending their own gardens, animals grazing in shaded areas, and children performing small tasks under watchful eyes. The rhythm of life was slower than in the days of the empire, yet it required greater focus, attentiveness, and care. The laborer observed his children, who now carried water to a patch of thirsty vegetables or collected stray leaves for compost. Every action reinforced the family's cohesion and their understanding of the delicate balance between work and survival. The absence of distant oversight had forced a new kind of awareness, one rooted in the direct consequences of daily labor. Each task, each observation, each small gesture ensured that the household endured, that life continued uninterrupted despite the unpredictability of the world beyond the village. By mid-afternoon, the laborer had completed the bulk of the morning's tasks. The animals were fed and settled, the garden was secure, and fences repaired. The village itself seemed to breathe in tandem with its residents, each household a microcosm of order, care, and resilience. Life had become a steady rhythm of observation, labor, and reflection, a cycle that defined survival and anchored the community in the absence of imperial authority. In these quiet, measured moments, the laborer understood that the essence of life now lay in attentiveness, patience, and the deliberate continuation of daily rituals. As the sun reached its peak, the village was bathed in brilliant light, and the warmth pressed gently but persistently on rooftops, paths, and fields. Dust rose in faint swirls from the well-trodden streets, moving slowly with the soft afternoon breeze. The laborer guided the goats and chickens toward areas of shade, ensuring they rested and grazed safely. The pig, satisfied with its cool mud, barely moved, a soft grunt marking its contentment. Each routine, though simple, demanded careful observation and timing, for the absence of distant protection made attentiveness crucial. The garden required continued care. The laborer moved slowly along the rows, loosening soil, weeding around vegetables, and inspecting leaves for early signs of disease. The children followed, carrying small baskets or fetching water from jars, learning the rhythms of labor that guaranteed sustenance. Even minor missteps, overwatering, missing a pest, or leaving a gate slightly open, could have consequences, reinforcing the importance of patience and precision in every task. Life, once guided by imperial authority, now depended entirely on careful, immediate attention. Around the village, other families followed similar rhythms. Women carried water, patched fences, and tended gardens, men repaired tools, reinforced pens, or guided animals, children assisted with minor chores, gaining lessons in observation, dexterity, and responsibility. The quiet sounds of labor, scraping wood, the clatter of stones, faint bleats of goats, combined into a steady, understated symphony of survival. Though life had contracted in scale since the fall of Rome, its demands had intensified, attentiveness and skill now determined the difference between ease and hardship. The laborer paused under the shade of a low tree, resting briefly and surveying the village. The garden flourished under his careful attention, animals were secure, and neighbors moved in parallel patterns, performing their own tasks. The heat pressed down, slowing movement and deepening concentration. Even in these seemingly ordinary hours, life was structured by rhythm, repetition, and diligence. Each action reinforced the household's stability, each decision shaped its continuity, and every gesture reflected knowledge passed through careful observation and lived experience. By early afternoon, the family paused for a light meal. Bread, porridge, and a few vegetables from the garden were shared quietly. The children rested, their bare feet brushing the warm dirt, eyes alert to the subtle movements of animals or the shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow. The laborer and his wife reflected briefly on the morning's work, animals fed and settled, the garden tended, fences repaired. The continuity of these routines, simple and repetitive as they were, formed the backbone of survival in a world without the protections or order once provided by the empire. After the meal, the laborer focused on minor repairs and preparation for the evening. A gate was reinforced with a small wooden brace, stones rearranged along a fence to prevent erosion, and stray leaves collected to nourish the soil. Children helped where they could, carrying small bundles or passing tools, each moment reinforcing skills, awareness, and a sense of responsibility. The village itself, though quieter than the bustling days of Rome, hummed with persistence, a collective rhythm of survival maintained through attention and cooperation. As the afternoon heat persisted, the laborer observed how the day's cycles interwove, animals seeking shade, children performing chores, neighbors repairing structures, and the garden responding to care. Life had contracted from the grand scale of the empire to the immediate and intimate scale of household and village. Yet within these constraints lay a steady, meditative rhythm, repeated work, attentive observation, and quiet reflection ensured that life continued, day after day, cycle after cycle. By mid-afternoon, the laborer concluded the bulk of the day's outdoor work. Animals were resting, the garden secured, and fences and paths reinforced. The children moved among tasks with calm focus, preparing small items for evening chores. The village settled into a soft lull, each household maintaining its own cycle, yet collectively contributing to the quiet continuity of life. In this ordinary, repetitive, and deliberate rhythm, survival and stability persisted, lessons hard-earned from the collapse of Rome and the intimate demands of daily existence. As the sun slipped below the horizon, the village entered a time of muted colors and softened sounds. The sky deepened from pale gold to dusky blue, and the outlines of roofs, fences, and trees grew gentler, less defined. The laborer guided the animals into their enclosures with calm familiarity. Goats moved willingly into their pens, chickens gathered close together in the coop, and the pig settled once more into its worn hollow of earth. Each animal responded to the fading light instinctively, their movements slowing as the day released its hold. The air cooled steadily, carrying the scent of dry grass, soil, and distant cooking fires. The laborer checked each latch and barrier with care, pressing wood and stone into place where needed. These quiet gestures were acts of reassurance, small but essential in a world without watchtowers, patrols, or laws enforced from afar. Night brought uncertainty as well as rest, and preparation was a form of comfort learned through repetition. Inside the home, the hearth glowed softly. The evening meal was simple and familiar, its warmth spreading gently through the small space. Bowls were filled, hands moved slowly, and the family gathered without urgency. The children ate quietly, their movements relaxed, their attention drifting between the flicker of firelight and the deepening shadows on the walls. The laborer felt the weight of the day settle into his body, not as strain, but as a steady, earned tiredness. Beyond the household, the village gradually surrendered to darkness. Fires dimmed, tools were stored, and footsteps faded from the paths. Only a few lingering sounds remained, the low murmur of animals settling, the distant crackle of embers, and the occasional rustle of wind through leaves. Without the structured noise of empire, no carts rumbling on stone roads, no shouted orders or crowded markets, the night felt expansive and still, shaped by nature rather than human command. After the meal, the laborer tended the fire, reducing it to glowing coals that would last through the night. Water was set aside, doors secured, and simple belongings arranged with care. These final acts of the day were performed slowly, each motion deliberate and unhurried. The children prepared for rest, lying down on straw mats, their breathing gradually deepening as fatigue drew them toward sleep. The laborer sat briefly in the dim light, listening to the village settle. The absence of empire no longer felt abrupt or empty, it had become a quiet background to life, replaced by routines rooted in land, weather, and careful attention. Time was no longer measured by official hours or distant obligations, but by light, labor, and rest. The passing of the day felt complete, enclosed, and whole. As darkness deepened, the sky filled with faint stars, barely visible through thin clouds. The village rested beneath them, small and fragile, yet steady. The laborer lay down at last, the warmth of the hearth lingering, the sounds of his family close and reassuring. The day, ordinary, repetitive, and demanding, had unfolded without disruption. In this quiet continuity lay survival itself. Sleep arrived slowly, carried by the rhythm of breathing, the distant murmur of animals, and the gentle certainty that another day would follow. Though Rome had fallen and its order dissolved into memory, life endured here, measured not by empire, but by the steady pulse of night giving way, eventually, to dawn. Deep night settled fully over the village, drawing a quiet veil across fields, paths, and rooftops. Darkness softened the edges of the world, blending fences, gardens, and walls into a single, calm silhouette. The air grew cooler and heavier, carrying the damp scent of earth and grass releasing the warmth stored during the day. Inside the home, the embers of the hearth glowed faintly, their low light pulsing gently like a steady heartbeat. The laborer slept on his straw mat, his body relaxed after the long sequence of familiar tasks. His breathing moved in a slow, even rhythm, matching the stillness of the house. Around him, the children slept deeply, their small forms barely shifting, comforted by the warmth of the room and the presence of family. Outside, the animals rested as well. Goats lay close together, chickens pressed into quiet clusters, and the pig barely stirred, its occasional movement leaving a soft impression in the mud. The village itself seemed to pause, suspended in darkness. No footsteps crossed the paths, no tools scraped or struck stone. Only subtle sounds remained, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through leaves, and the faint creak of wood as structures adjusted to the cooling air. In the absence of Roman roads filled with traffic or cities alive through the night, silence became the dominant presence, shaping the hours with calm persistence. Time in the deep night felt different, unmeasured and unhurried. Without bells, watches, or official schedules, the hours passed guided only by the body's need for rest and the slow movement of stars overhead. The laborer's world no longer answered to imperial clocks or distant commands. Instead, it followed cycles older and more enduring, darkness yielding eventually to light, rest preparing the body for work, and quiet restoring balance after effort. Occasionally, the laborer shifted slightly in his sleep, responding instinctively to distant sounds. Awareness never vanished completely, it lingered lightly, shaped by years of living without walls guarded by soldiers or cities secured by authority. Safety came from familiarity, from knowing the sounds of animals, wind, and night creatures, and recognizing when something did not belong. Tonight, all remained as expected. The village held its breath peacefully. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across the sky, briefly dimming the stars before passing on. The fields lay still beneath them, seeds resting in soil carefully prepared earlier that day. Gardens waited quietly, leaves folded inward, moisture gathering along their edges. Every element of the landscape participated in this shared rest, pausing before the next cycle of labor and care. Inside the home, the embers dimmed further, casting only the faintest glow. Shadows deepened, and the room grew uniformly dark. The laborer's thoughts, even in sleep, were shaped by routine, animals, soil, tools, weather. These concerns formed a gentle undercurrent rather than a burden, woven into the rhythm of life that sustained the household. The fall of Rome had stripped away distant structures, but it had left behind something quieter and more immediate, a life measured by attention and repetition. As the night progressed, the air cooled a little more, and dew began to form outside. The village remained still, enclosed within its fragile boundaries of wood, clay, and stone. Yet within this stillness lay endurance. Each household rested, gathering strength for the work to come. The deep night did not threaten, it protected, offering rest, continuity, and the promise that darkness itself was only one phase of an unbroken cycle. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, time continued its steady movement forward. Though dawn was still far away, the night was already shaping the next day, holding the village in silence until light would return and the rhythm of labor would begin once more. In the quiet hours before dawn, the village remained wrapped in darkness, yet the night no longer felt complete. A subtle shift moved through the air, barely perceptible, as if the world itself was preparing to wake. The stars faded slightly, their sharpness softened by thin clouds drifting across the sky. Cool air settled close to the ground, carrying the scent of dew and damp soil. The laborer slept lightly now, his body instinctively attuned to the approaching morning. Outside, the animals began to stir in small, quiet ways. A goat adjusted its position, hooves brushing against packed earth. Chickens shifted within the coop, feathers rustling softly as they responded to the gradual change in light. The pig turned in its resting place, exhaling slowly, its movement steady and familiar. These signs were subtle, yet meaningful, part of a shared awareness that the long night was nearing its end. Inside the home, the embers in the hearth glowed faintly, their warmth lingering just enough to hold back the chill. The laborer shifted on his mat, his breathing changing rhythm as rest slowly gave way to readiness. Years of living close to the land had shaped his internal sense of time more reliably than any device or decree. Without bells or schedules imposed by empire, waking came naturally, guided by the body and the environment. Beyond the household, the village existed in a state between rest and movement. No one yet stepped onto the paths, but structures seemed to wait, holding their forms in quiet anticipation. Roofs beaded with moisture, fences darkened by dew, and garden leaves glistened faintly in the dim light. The land itself felt paused, suspended in the final moments before transition. A distant bird call broke the silence, brief and tentative. It did not announce the day with confidence, but rather tested the stillness, acknowledging the subtle shift in the sky. The sound faded quickly, absorbed by the surrounding darkness. The laborer's awareness deepened, his senses alert even as his body remained still. The world beyond the walls of the home began to reassert itself gently, layer by layer. The air cooled slightly more before warming would begin, a familiar pattern repeated each day. Moisture gathered along the ground, settling on tools left outside and clinging to the edges of the garden beds. Seeds rested quietly beneath the soil, unchanged yet ready. This pause, neither night nor day, held a particular calm, an interval untouched by labor or expectation. In earlier generations, such hours might have been marked by distant signals, guarded gates, or the faint hum of imperial order continuing through the night. Now, the stillness was complete and unclaimed. The village answered only to the land and the sky, its rhythm shaped by seasons rather than authority. This freedom was not loud or triumphant, it was quiet, demanding awareness and patience rather than obedience. Inside, the children remained asleep, their breathing slow and deep. The laborer lay still, listening to the soft sounds of the pre-dawn world, the faint wind, the shifting animals, the distant bird. These moments of stillness were as essential as work, offering balance and restoration. The absence of movement did not signal emptiness, but preparation. Gradually, almost without notice, the darkness thinned. The horizon lightened by the smallest degree, hinting at the return of color and form. The village held this moment gently, suspended between what had been and what was about to begin. Another cycle waited just beyond the edge of perception, ready to unfold with the same steady rhythm of care, labor, and quiet endurance. The first light of dawn arrived quietly, without announcement. A pale gray hue spread along the horizon, separating land from sky and gently revealing the outlines of trees, fences, and low rooftops. The village emerged slowly from darkness, its forms softened by lingering night air and thin mist resting close to the ground. Dew clung to leaves and wooden beams, catching the faint light and reflecting it back in muted glimmers. The laborer stirred fully now, his body responding to the returning light. Rising from his mat, he moved carefully through the home, mindful not to disturb the children still wrapped in sleep. The embers in the hearth were coaxed gently back to life, releasing a low warmth that pushed away the chill of night. Outside, the faint sounds of animals greeted the morning, a soft bleat, the rustle of feathers, the steady breathing of the pig. The day announced itself not through noise, but through presence. Stepping beyond the doorway, the laborer inhaled the cool air, heavy with moisture and earth. The garden lay quiet, its leaves dark and still, waiting for warmth. He walked among the rows, inspecting the soil, noting where dew had settled thickest and where plants leaned slightly from the night breeze. These early observations shaped the day ahead, guiding decisions long before tools were lifted or hands touched the earth. Around the village, other households began to stir. Doors opened slowly, figures emerged with measured movements, and small fires were lit. There were no shouted greetings or hurried steps, only the gentle reappearance of life. Water was drawn from wells, animals guided from pens, and tools gathered for the work ahead. The rhythm of the village returned seamlessly, as if it had never paused at all. The children woke gradually, their movements unhurried, eyes adjusting to the pale light filtering through the home. They joined in small tasks, carrying water or scattering feed, their gestures familiar and precise. The laborer observed them briefly, recognizing how the repetition of these mornings shaped both skill and understanding. In a world without formal instruction or imperial order, learning occurred through participation and attention. The sky continued to brighten, shifting from gray to soft gold. Shadows shortened, and the village took on clearer form. Fences revealed their repairs, roofs their careful patchwork, and paths their familiar curves. Each detail reflected the accumulated effort of many days, the quiet labor that sustained life without spectacle. The fall of Rome had removed distant authority, but it had sharpened the importance of immediate care and observation. The laborer returned to the animals, guiding goats toward grazing areas and ensuring the chickens moved safely into the open. The pig rose slowly, shaking off the stillness of night. These early routines anchored the day, grounding it in continuity. Work did not begin suddenly, it unfolded naturally, shaped by light, weather, and the body's readiness. As the sun lifted higher, warmth began to spread across the fields and village paths. The mist thinned and retreated, revealing soil darkened by moisture and ready for the day's attention. The laborer paused briefly, surveying the village as it fully awakened. Life had resumed its steady course, unchanged by the passage of night. In this quiet dawn, there was no sense of beginning anew, only continuation. Each day followed the last, connected through routine and care. The empire that once structured time had long since faded, but the day arrived nonetheless, guided by light, habit, and the enduring rhythm of ordinary life. As the morning advanced, the village gradually filled with motion and quiet purpose. The sun climbed higher, strengthening its light and warming the damp ground left by the night. Paths that had seemed indistinct at dawn now showed their worn lines clearly, shaped by countless steps over many years. The laborer moved steadily through the yard, his actions guided by habit rather than conscious thought. Morning was not a beginning so much as a continuation, a return to tasks that had paused only briefly during the hours of rest. The animals responded fully to the daylight. Goats wandered toward familiar grazing spots, their hooves pressing softly into the moist earth. Chickens spread across the yard, scratching with renewed energy, while the pig circled its pen before settling into a slow, deliberate rhythm of movement. The laborer watched carefully, adjusting gates and boundaries to keep order. In the absence of imperial structures that once controlled land and livestock on a grand scale, such attention was essential. Control now lived in observation and small, repeated corrections. The garden demanded renewed focus. As sunlight reached deeper into the rows, leaves lifted slightly, responding to warmth. The laborer loosened soil where it had hardened overnight, guiding moisture toward roots and removing weeds that threatened to compete for nourishment. The children followed, each carrying out small tasks suited to their strength and attention. One gathered stones from the paths, another carried water, while another watched for insects among the leaves. These routines shaped the morning hours, teaching patience and responsibility without instruction or command. Across the village, similar scenes unfolded. Neighbors repaired tools dulled by yesterday's use, adjusted fences weakened by weather, and prepared for longer hours of work ahead. The sounds of activity grew more distinct but remained subdued, wood tapped into place, metal brushed against stone, water poured into clay vessels. Life resumed not with urgency, but with certainty. Each household knew what was required and moved toward it with quiet determination. The laborer paused briefly to drink water, feeling the warmth of the sun spread across his shoulders. He surveyed the garden and animals, noting small changes that would shape the rest of the day. A patch of soil needed extra care, a fence required reinforcement, and one goat lingered too close to the boundary. These details formed the true structure of time, replacing the distant calendars and schedules once imposed by Rome. The day was measured by needs observed and tasks completed. As the morning progressed, fatigue did not yet weigh heavily. The body moved easily, strengthened by routine and familiarity. The children shifted between work and quiet play, their energy rising and falling naturally with the pace of tasks. Even these moments of lightness were part of learning, reinforcing awareness of surroundings and responsibility for shared space. The village now stood fully awake beneath the rising sun. Shadows shortened, and colors sharpened, green leaves, brown soil, pale stone, and sun-warmed wood. Each surface reflected care and effort accumulated over time. The fall of the empire had stripped away distant order, but it had also revealed a different structure, one built from repetition, attention, and continuity. As the laborer returned to his work, the day settled into its familiar rhythm. Morning tasks flowed into one another without pause, forming a steady pattern that would carry the household toward midday once more. In this ordinary progression lay endurance itself, a quiet assurance that life, shaped by simple acts and patient care, would continue regardless of the rise or fall of empires. As the morning matured into its later hours, the village settled into a deeper, more deliberate pace. The sun stood higher now, its warmth no longer tentative but steady, pressing gently against skin, wood, and stone. The laborer adjusted his movements accordingly, conserving energy while maintaining attention. This part of the day was not about haste, but endurance, about sustaining effort rather than beginning it. The animals moved less restlessly. Goats grazed in familiar patterns, returning again and again to favored patches of grass. Chickens scratched the soil methodically, their earlier bursts of energy giving way to a calmer rhythm. The pigs shifted occasionally, responding to warmth and shade with slow, thoughtful movements. The laborer observed them from a distance, intervening only when necessary. Experience had taught him when to act and when to allow the natural balance to hold. In the garden, work became precise and careful. The laborer focused on tasks that required patience rather than strength, thinning crowded plants, guiding vines, pressing soil gently around fragile stems. Each motion was controlled, economical, shaped by years of repetition. The children assisted quietly, their movements slower now, matching the tone of the day. They learned that not all labor demanded force, some required restraint, observation, and timing. Across the village, activity continued in parallel. Neighbors worked in silence or near silence, each absorbed in the details of their own responsibilities. The absence of centralized authority was felt most strongly in these moments. There were no overseers, no schedules imposed from beyond the village. Work unfolded according to shared understanding and environmental cues, the sun's position, the heat of the air, the condition of soil and animals. The laborer paused occasionally to assess progress. A repaired fence held firm, vegetables rested securely in storage, and the garden showed signs of health and balance. These confirmations did not bring celebration, only quiet reassurance. Survival depended on maintaining this equilibrium, not exceeding it. Excess effort risked exhaustion, neglect risked loss. The correct path lay between, guided by attentiveness rather than ambition. The children shifted between small tasks and stillness. They sat briefly in the shade, watching insects move among plants or tracing lines in the dirt with sticks. These pauses were not wasted time. They were part of learning, moments when awareness deepened and the environment revealed its subtle patterns. Life after the fall of Rome demanded this sensitivity. Without distant systems to correct mistakes, understanding had to come from observation and experience. The sun continued its slow climb, and shadows shortened further. Heat shimmered faintly above the ground, and the scent of dry earth grew stronger. The laborer drank water sparingly, mindful of supply, and returned to work with measured steps. His body knew this hour well, the point where strength met patience, where work continued without urgency. By the time the late morning approached its height, the village existed in a state of sustained effort. Nothing dramatic occurred. No single task stood out. Yet within this ordinariness lay stability. Each household maintained itself through countless small decisions, each reinforcing the structure of daily life. The empire that once organized time and labor on a vast scale was gone, but order remained. It lived here, in these late morning hours, shaped by sunlight, habit, and the quiet determination of ordinary people who continued, day after day, to hold the world together through careful, unremarkable work. As the sun approached its highest point once more, the village felt the familiar weight of midday settling in. The light grew brighter and more direct, pressing down on fields and rooftops, flattening shadows until they clung closely to walls and fences. The laborer adjusted his pace instinctively, allowing movements to slow without stopping entirely. This was the hour when strength yielded slightly to caution, and effort became more economical, shaped by the body's awareness of limits. The animals responded to the heat in predictable ways. Goats gathered again beneath trees and along fence lines where shade lingered. Chickens retreated toward cooler patches of soil, scratching less frequently, their movements subdued. The pig returned to its mud, lying almost motionless, its comfort found in stillness. The laborer observed these changes, making small adjustments, opening space for shade, checking water, guiding animals gently rather than forcing movement. Care now meant restraint as much as action. In the garden, the work shifted further toward observation. The soil, warmed by the sun, released a dry, mineral scent. The laborer inspected leaves for signs of stress, touching the ground lightly to judge moisture. Some plants were left untouched, their needs met for now, others received brief attention, a careful watering or a small adjustment of soil. Experience had taught him that too much effort at this hour could do harm. The children followed quietly, their earlier energy softened by heat, learning that knowing when not to act was as important as knowing what to do. Across the village, the same understanding took hold. Activity did not cease, but it became gentler. Neighbors worked in shaded areas, repaired tools indoors, or rested briefly while remaining alert. The sounds of labor faded to a low murmur, occasional footsteps, the pour of water, the soft scrape of wood. Time seemed to stretch, each moment expanding under the sun's steady gaze. Without clocks or signals, the body itself marked the hour. The laborer paused in the shade of the home, drinking water slowly and feeling the pulse of the day settle into his limbs. Fatigue did not arrive suddenly, it unfolded gradually, a reminder of the long continuity of work. This tiredness was not unwelcome. It carried meaning, proof of effort sustained and responsibilities met. The empire that once demanded output and efficiency was gone, what remained was a quieter demand, to endure without waste, to preserve strength for what still lay ahead. The children rested nearby, sitting against a wall or lying in the grass, their eyes following clouds drifting slowly overhead. Even in stillness, awareness remained. They watched animals, listened to distant sounds, and absorbed the subtle signals of the environment. These moments shaped understanding more deeply than instruction ever could, embedding knowledge through lived experience. As midday fully arrived, the village entered a shared pause. Work did not end, but it loosened its grip. The laborer surveyed his surroundings once more, animals secure, garden stable, fences holding. Nothing required immediate correction. This absence of urgency was itself a success, earned through earlier attention and care. The light remained strong, the air warm and still. The day hovered at its peak, balanced between what had already been done and what remained. In this suspended hour, life after the fall of Rome revealed its true shape, not dramatic or chaotic, but steady, patient, and deeply rooted in the rhythm of ordinary human endurance. After midday passed its quiet peak, the quality of light began to shift. It remained bright, but the sharpness softened slightly, as if the sun had eased its grip on the land. Shadows lengthened just enough to be noticed, stretching away from walls and trees in thin, deliberate lines. The laborer sensed this change without looking upward. His body recognized the signal that the most demanding part of the day was behind him, and that a different kind of work now lay ahead. Movement resumed with subtle intention. Tasks that had been postponed during the heat returned to attention, though none were approached with haste. The laborer carried tools back into the open, feeling the ground beneath his feet warm but no longer burning. Each step landed carefully, conserving strength for the remaining hours. Fatigue lingered in his muscles, but it had settled into a manageable weight, something to be carried rather than resisted. The animals stirred gradually. Goats ventured out from shade to graze again, choosing paths worn smooth by repeated use. Chickens resumed their scratching, testing the soil with renewed curiosity. The pig rose briefly, shifted position, and returned to rest, responding more to habit than urgency. These movements marked the turning of the day more clearly than any instrument could. Life here followed these signals faithfully. In the garden, attention returned to tasks left unfinished. The laborer guided a few wandering vines, cleared debris caught in narrow paths, and checked the stability of supports. The soil, having absorbed hours of heat, responded differently now, drier on the surface, cooler just beneath. His hands adjusted instinctively, pressing lightly, disturbing only what was necessary. The children assisted again, their energy slowly returning, though quieter than in the morning. They worked without prompting, shaped by the rhythm they had absorbed since early childhood. Across the village, similar patterns unfolded. Doors opened, and figures emerged from shade. Tools reappeared in hands, and soft sounds of activity spread once more. There was no signal to begin, everyone responded to the same environmental cue. This shared sensitivity replaced the rigid coordination once imposed by empire. Order now emerged from attention rather than command. The laborer paused occasionally to stretch his back or rest his hands, acknowledging the long hours already passed. He understood that overexertion late in the day carried its own risks. Injury or exhaustion could threaten not only the present task, but the days ahead. Survival depended on continuity, on remaining capable tomorrow as well as today. The light continued its slow descent, and with it came a subtle lift in mood. The oppressive stillness of midday faded, replaced by gentle movement in the air. Leaves stirred faintly, and distant sounds traveled farther. The laborer noticed these changes without naming them, allowing them to shape his pace naturally. This portion of the day belonged neither to beginning nor to ending. It existed between, a long, quiet stretch where work continued simply because it must, guided by habit and necessity rather than urgency. The world after Rome had learned to exist in these in-between hours, sustained not by grand structures, but by the steady, unremarkable persistence of ordinary people moving in harmony with the slow turning of the day. As the afternoon deepened, the sun moved lower, and its light spread across the village at a gentler angle. Warmth remained, but it no longer pressed down with the same insistence. Shadows stretched wider now, reaching across paths and fields, touching places that had been exposed all day. The laborer sensed relief in this shift, not as comfort, but as permission to slow further without risk. Work continued, though its character changed. Heavy tasks were set aside in favor of lighter, more deliberate actions. The laborer focused on arranging, collecting, and preparing rather than building or repairing. Tools were gathered and cleaned, their edges checked and wiped free of dirt. These small acts of care extended the life of each object, an essential practice in a world where replacement was uncertain and resources limited. The animals moved with renewed ease. Goats grazed steadily, no longer clustered tightly in shade. Chickens wandered farther from shelter, pecking at the ground with calm persistence. The pig stood briefly, drinking water before settling again. The laborer noted each behavior without interruption. Evening care would come later, for now, the animals managed themselves within familiar boundaries. In the garden, the light revealed textures hidden earlier in the day. Leaves caught the sun at shallow angles, their surfaces glowing softly. The laborer walked slowly between rows, observing rather than touching. He checked for broken stems, signs of pests, or soil disturbed by animals. Most of what he saw required no action. Stability, when achieved, was best preserved through restraint. The children followed, quiet and attentive, learning that stewardship often meant leaving things as they were. Across the village, the sounds of labor softened again. Footsteps became less frequent, replaced by occasional movements and distant activity. Smoke rose lightly from some homes as preparations for the evening began. These signs marked the approaching transition from work to rest, though no sharp boundary existed between the two. Life after the fall of Rome flowed in gradients rather than divisions. The laborer felt the accumulated hours settle into his body. Muscles held a deep, steady fatigue, familiar and expected. It carried no urgency, only the quiet reminder that effort had been sustained. He adjusted his posture carefully, aware that the day was not yet complete. Evening still required attention, and tomorrow depended on how well the present was concluded. The air cooled gradually, and movement became easier. A faint breeze passed through the village, stirring dust and leaves. The laborer paused, standing still for a moment, letting the sensation pass. These brief pauses were not indulgences, they were necessary recalibrations, moments when body and environment realigned. As the afternoon leaned closer to evening, the village existed in a calm continuation. There was no sense of loss in the fading light, only transition. The empire that once dictated schedules and demanded output had vanished, but time still moved forward, guided now by sunlight, fatigue, and the quiet intelligence of lived experience. In these late afternoon hours, ordinary life persisted, not through force or decree, but through gentle attention and unbroken routine. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the village with long, warm streaks of light. Shadows stretched across fences, roofs, and garden beds, deepening the contours of familiar shapes. The laborer felt the change in atmosphere immediately. The air was cooler, less pressing, and the day's fatigue shifted from a heavy weight to a gentle awareness. Animals moved differently as well. Goats lingered under trees, nibbling at leaves with leisurely attention. Chickens clustered together in quiet corners of the yard, pecking occasionally at stray seeds. The pig rested fully now, its breathing slow and regular, barely disturbing the earth beneath it. The laborer walked among them, making small adjustments only when necessary, confident that each creature had learned the rhythm of the day. In the garden, the sunlight lingered at an angle that illuminated textures and colors missed earlier. Leaves glimmered softly, revealing subtle imperfections and tiny signs of growth. The laborer attended briefly to tasks that required little energy but ensured continued stability, tying loose vines, checking supports, gathering minor debris. These acts were deliberate, precise, and measured, reflecting the quiet attention that sustained life in the absence of distant oversight. Children moved among these tasks quietly, their energy subdued by the cumulative hours. Some carried small tools, others gathered water, while one watched the interplay of light and shadow across the garden. Each action reinforced learning through observation, repetition, and awareness. Evening was a time to consolidate knowledge of the day, not to rush or demand new effort. Across the village, the sounds of activity softened further. Tools were set aside, doors closed with gentle care, and small fires began to glow in homes preparing for evening meals. Conversations, when they occurred, were low and deliberate. The rhythm of the village had shifted from focused labor to attentive conclusion, a transition guided by light, energy, and the innate understanding of what must be preserved before night. The laborer paused, standing beneath a tree and observing the surrounding houses and paths. Each detail, the arrangement of fences, the placement of tools, the condition of soil, represented hours of effort translated into stability. This stability was fragile yet resilient, a product of constant care and adaptation. The fall of Rome had stripped away imperial structures, but what remained was an intimate, lived order shaped by human diligence. As the sun sank lower, warmth gave way to gentle coolness, and the air carried the scents of soil, herbs, and faint smoke. The laborer guided animals back toward pens where necessary, ensuring that each would remain safe through the night. The children, sensing the nearing end of active hours, moved slowly, completing minor tasks with patience. Even in these late hours, the village maintained its own rhythm, quiet, deliberate, and unhurried. Life persisted not through commands or schedules imposed from afar, but through the continuous, measured attention of those who lived within it. The ordinary actions of the evening, repeated day after day, formed a structure more enduring than any distant empire. As the first hints of dusk settled over rooftops and fields, the laborer felt the day reaching its gentle conclusion. The village exhaled softly, shadows deepened, and the familiar cycle of work, care, and observation prepared to yield to night. This transition, neither abrupt nor dramatic, marked the quiet promise of continuity. Tomorrow would arrive, and with it, another day shaped by ordinary persistence. As the sun dipped closer to the horizon, the village entered the soft embrace of twilight. Colors mellowed, greens deepened into muted tones, earth turned a warm brown, and shadows stretched long and indistinct. The laborer paused in the yard, feeling the temperature drop slightly, and breathed in the air scented with dry soil, herbs, and the lingering warmth of the day. Animals began settling for the night. Goats huddled together in shaded corners, bleating softly in reassurance. Chickens had gathered inside the coop, their feathers rustling quietly as they adjusted positions. The pig lay fully at rest, its presence marked only by gentle shifts and slow, steady breathing. The laborer moved among them with minimal intervention, ensuring that boundaries were secure and that each creature was comfortable. In the garden, the fading light revealed subtle details missed in the glare of midday. Leaves caught the last rays of sun, flowers reflected the deepening tones of the sky, and small insects moved quietly among the soil. The laborer performed only light tasks, gathering small debris, tying loose plants, checking supports, each movement deliberate, conserving energy while maintaining the day's order. Children wandered slowly among the garden and animals, finishing minor chores and watching the sky change. Their actions were measured, quiet, and absorbed in the rhythms they had learned over countless days. The transition from activity to rest was gentle, and no hurry marked these final movements. Even in stillness, learning continued, for observation of subtle shifts in light, animal behavior, and plant condition carried knowledge far deeper than words. Across the village, homes began to glow faintly with firelight, signaling preparations for evening meals. The soft clatter of dishes, the faint crackle of embers, and the low hum of conversation blended with the natural sounds of the approaching night, rustling leaves, distant birds returning to roost, and the occasional movement of small animals in fields beyond. Life moved in layers, balancing human care with the patterns of the natural world. The laborer stepped back to observe the village as a whole. Each fence, roof, and garden reflected the day's attention, a subtle but unmistakable testament to steady effort. Though Rome's structures of power were gone, another order had emerged, intimate, immediate, and sustained by constant observation. Stability now lived in repetition, attentiveness, and quiet, unremarkable care. As darkness deepened, the air cooled further. Evening tasks drew to a close. Animals were secured, tools were cleaned and stored, and the garden required no further intervention. The laborer took a final look at his surroundings, noting the calm presence of the village as it prepared for night. Shadows merged with darkness, and the first stars appeared faintly in the sky. The children returned indoors, their movements slow and deliberate, ready to rest. The laborer followed, carrying with him the quiet knowledge of the day's completion. The village exhaled collectively, slipping into a calm lull that would last through the night. Outside, nature continued its gentle rhythm, the world holding steady in the absence of distant authority, sustained entirely by the enduring presence of those who lived within it. In this twilight, the day reached its soft, inevitable conclusion. Work, care, and observation had merged seamlessly, and the ordinary persistence of life carried the village into the night, ready to begin again with the next dawn. Night descended fully, draping the village in deep shadow. The sky darkened to a velvety blue, punctuated by faint stars emerging one by one. The air cooled noticeably, carrying the scent of damp earth, herbs, and lingering warmth from the sun-warmed soil. The laborer moved carefully through the household one last time, checking animals and securing small details that ensured a peaceful night. Animals had settled into stillness. Goats huddled quietly in corners, the soft rustle of their fur the only movement in their pens. Chickens slept huddled together in the coop, while the pig rested in a shallow depression of earth, exhaling slowly. Their rhythm was calm, natural, and self-sufficient. The laborer's presence ensured safety, but it was quiet reassurance rather than guidance, a final gesture of care before the world fully yielded to darkness. In the garden, shadows merged with soil and foliage. Leaves no longer shimmered, stems stood motionless. The faint rustle of the breeze moved through trees and shrubs, whispering in a tone almost imperceptible. The laborer performed minimal tasks, checking fences and watering sparingly where needed. Even in this simplicity, each action carried weight, small mistakes in the night could become significant by morning. Inside the home, the hearth was reduced to glowing embers, providing warmth and a dim, steady light. The children lay quietly on their mats, breathing evenly, absorbed by the rhythm of night. The laborer settled nearby, observing briefly before allowing himself the rest he had earned. The day's work was complete, and the continuity of survival now depended on sleep, on the restoration of energy, and the quiet maintenance of order. Across the village, lights dimmed or disappeared entirely. A few homes maintained low fires for warmth or cooking, but most had surrendered to darkness. The sounds of the natural world became more prominent: distant night birds, the soft movement of small creatures, and the faint rustling of leaves in the cooling air. The human rhythm had softened to align with these patterns, no longer demanding the environment bend to its will. The laborer felt a sense of completeness in this ordinary night. Though Rome had fallen and its order vanished, another structure persisted, formed by routine, care, and intimate knowledge of the land. Stability was not derived from laws or distant authority, it emerged from the patient, repeated actions of ordinary people. Each small gesture contributed to continuity, each act of attention reinforcing the web of daily life. As darkness deepened, the village became a single, unified rhythm of stillness and subtle motion. The laborer's body rested, the children slept, and animals breathed softly. The night held them all, protective and steady. Life persisted in silence, measured not by decree or schedule, but by awareness, routine, and the gentle unfolding of time. In this quiet, the day's cycle found its balance. Effort, care, and observation had merged into the ongoing story of survival and adaptation. Though invisible from the perspective of history, this ordinary, meditative night carried the promise of the next day, the next cycle, and the enduring rhythm of life after empire. Deep night settled fully over the village, and the world became hushed. The stars gleamed more clearly now, scattered across a dark, velvet sky. A faint breeze stirred leaves occasionally, creating soft, intermittent whispers that moved through the stillness. The air was cool, carrying the mingled scents of damp earth, herbs, and the faint smoke of dying hearths. The laborer rested quietly on his mat, muscles eased from the day's work. His breathing fell into a slow, steady rhythm, mirroring the soft heartbeat of the sleeping household. The children were undisturbed, their forms small and peaceful on straw mats. Each animal had settled completely, their presence marked only by the occasional shifting or exhale. The village existed as a single, coherent body, held together by the quiet pulse of attention and care that had persisted through the day. In the garden, shadows deepened, blending soil, plants, and garden tools into uniform darkness. Only the faintest outlines were visible against the soft glow of remaining embers in the hearth. The laborer had completed all necessary tasks: fences were secure, water set for the animals, and garden supports maintained. Night demanded little action, yet every precaution taken earlier ensured that all would remain safe until morning. The village's rhythm slowed, measured entirely by natural cues. The absence of imperial order meant that life's patterns relied on observation, experience, and instinct. Each household had internalized these rhythms: work and care during light, rest during darkness. In this deep night, time was almost imperceptible, flowing slowly, marked by the gentle movement of air and the faint breathing of sleeping creatures. A distant owl called once, its note breaking the quiet without disturbing it. The laborer remained still, listening, attuned to every subtle sound. In this attentive quiet, he understood the landscape, the animals, and even the unseen world beyond the village. Each sound, each movement, was part of a delicate balance that had replaced the rigid authority of empire with lived knowledge. The cool air of night settled over rooftops and fields. Dew began to form again on plants and soil, reflecting the faint starlight. The laborer felt a calm certainty that all was as it should be. The work of the day had been completed, and the night's stillness provided both rest and protection. Even without distant structures, the village functioned seamlessly, sustained by the continuity of ordinary acts repeated day after day. As sleep deepened, the household's presence softened into the larger rhythm of the natural world. Small creatures moved quietly, the wind whispered gently, and the occasional rustle of distant foliage punctuated the pervasive calm. The village was alive only in its breath, the interplay of observation and care that extended through time without requiring grandeur or authority. In this profound night, the laborer rested fully. The ordinary, unremarkable endurance of life after the fall of Rome persisted, measured not by history or empire, but by attentiveness, repetition, and the gentle maintenance of stability. The village, ordinary yet resilient, awaited the eventual return of light, secure in the rhythm that had carried it through countless days and nights. The night lingered, deep and still, but subtle changes began to signal the approaching dawn. Darkness remained, yet it softened, as if the sky itself held its breath in anticipation. A faint light edged the horizon, barely perceptible, transforming the blackness into a muted blue-gray. The laborer, still resting, sensed this shift even before seeing it, his body attuned to rhythms far older than clocks or calendars. Animals moved slightly in response. Goats stirred softly, shifting positions as though aware that night's deepest hours were ending. Chickens adjusted within the coop, their subtle movements signaling comfort yet readiness. The pig rose briefly, stretching, then returned to its resting place. These motions were slow, deliberate, and measured, marking the delicate transition between night and day. In the garden, outlines became clearer in the dim pre-dawn light. Leaves, soil, and tools emerged in faint relief. The laborer's eyes, accustomed to dark, could trace shapes with precision, noting subtle changes caused by dew, wind, or the animal's movements. Although no immediate tasks demanded attention, the day's first observations began naturally, guiding the sequence of care that would follow once the sun fully rose. The village breathed quietly. Roofs and fences absorbed the fading chill of night, walls released the day's warmth stored from the previous evening, and paths remained soft with accumulated dew. Even in the absence of human movement, the structures of daily life were alive, silent, functional, and resilient. The laborer understood that stability depended on these quiet interactions, the preparation inherent in night and the anticipation of light. Children stirred gradually, their sleep lightening with the first hints of brightness. Movements were tentative and careful, as though the body remembered the day's rhythm even before consciousness fully returned. Each action, stretching, adjusting blankets, checking animals, was part of a practiced pattern, ingrained over countless cycles of work and rest. Across the village, faint signs of the day emerged. Smoke lifted gently from one home where an early hearth had been rekindled. The first birds sang tentatively, their notes small but insistent, filling the air with the promise of motion. The laborer observed, listening to these cues, and allowed himself a sense of anticipation without urgency. The day was coming, as it always did, measured not by command but by light, sound, and the careful observation of living creatures. The cool air carried faint scents, wet earth, herbs, and the lingering warmth of human and animal bodies. The laborer rose slowly, testing his limbs, attuning his senses to the subtle differences that distinguished pre-dawn from deep night. Every detail, the position of an animal, the moisture in soil, the faint coloration of the sky, provided information that shaped the unfolding day. As the first rays of light touched the village, life began to move more visibly. Shadows receded, animals adjusted fully to the awakening environment, and the laborer prepared himself for the familiar routines that would mark the new day. The cycle, continuous and unbroken, returned, work, care, and observation interwoven seamlessly with the rhythm of nature and human life. In this quiet prelude to dawn, the village existed in perfect equilibrium, poised between the endurance of night and the renewal of morning. Stability persisted, not imposed by empire or decree, but created through ordinary, sustained attention, a testament to the resilience of life lived close to the land. The first true rays of morning bathed the village in soft golden light. Shadows shortened rapidly, revealing the textures and colors of earth, wood, and foliage. Every fence, roof, and garden bed stood clearly in the gentle illumination, familiar yet renewed by the changing light. The laborer rose fully, feeling strength returning to his limbs after the quiet night. The day awaited, and he was ready to meet it. Animals responded to the morning with subtle energy. Goats moved confidently to grazing areas, heads low and steady, chewing thoughtfully as they absorbed the first warmth of the sun. Chickens emerged from the coop, scratching and pecking in lively succession, their movements measured but increasingly purposeful. The pig wandered slowly to water, its breathing regular and calm. Each creature followed an internal rhythm, guided by habit, environment, and the faint cues of the laborer's presence. The garden glowed under the sun's early rays. Dew sparkled on leaves, soil darkened with moisture, and the delicate lines of plants were outlined in light. The laborer walked between the rows, checking supports, loosening soil, and making small adjustments with deliberate care. The children followed, performing familiar tasks, carrying water, gathering tools, and observing the subtle transformations in plants and soil that only attentive eyes could notice. Across the village, morning activity unfolded naturally. Neighbors emerged from their homes, doors opened slowly, and fires were rekindled for breakfast. Tools were gathered and readied, small repairs attended to, and the hum of life returned without need for instruction or command. The village moved as one, coordinated by shared knowledge of the land, animal behavior, and the essential tasks that shaped each day. The laborer paused at the edge of the garden, taking in the full scope of the village. Every detail bore witness to ordinary diligence: fences upright, pathways cleared, animals accounted for, and gardens prepared for the day. The fall of Rome had removed distant authority, yet the rhythm of life persisted, sustained by attentive care, repetition, and the intimate knowledge of people living in harmony with their environment. Stability now existed through observation and quiet persistence rather than imperial decree. Light strengthened further, warming rooftops and fields, carrying sounds across the village, low conversations, the clatter of breakfast preparation, and animals moving with purpose. Each sound was a signal, guiding the continuation of familiar routines. The laborer joined the flow seamlessly, beginning the workday with calm focus, attentive to what must be done, yet measured by experience rather than urgency. Children absorbed these movements, learning the pace and priorities of daily life. Even without formal instruction, they understood the rhythm, when to act, when to observe, and how attention could sustain both life and community. This learning, grounded in ordinary experience, was as vital as any law or structure once imposed by distant authority. As morning progressed fully, the village existed in perfect harmony. The ordinary labor, the care of animals, the tending of gardens, all merged into a single continuous cycle. The day had begun anew, echoing the same patterns as countless days before, resilient, enduring, and quietly ordered. The fall of empires had changed little in the essentials of survival: routine, attention, and careful stewardship ensured life persisted, quietly and effectively, day after day. In this final moment, the laborer looked over the village with quiet satisfaction. Each small action, repeated countless times, had created stability and continuity. Ordinary people, acting with care and attention, had built a world capable of sustaining itself through the night and into the new day, a life simple, unremarkable, yet profoundly resilient, echoing the enduring rhythm of human existence long after the structures of empire had faded.